an idea that was developed by Edward de Bono back in 1967 called lateral thinking, or in layman terms, thinking outside the box. What I want to do is flip that and use lateral thinking to now show you how there's a vertical component and how geography's vertical depth is also strategic depth. You would notice that India has a horizontal advantage over Pakistan's geography, whereas Pakistan clearly has the vertical depth advantage. As we focus into this map, you will notice that the terrain is pretty flat all the way from Sindh, stretching into northern India, all the way through to Bangladesh. In the event that the Indian army advanced into eastern Pakistan, the Pakistani army could melt into the mountains of western Pakistan and establish their bases there and launch attacks from there. This is very different to Pakistan moving eastwards into India. Then they would have flat terrain to move all across northern India, and their northern flank would be protected by the fact that there are these massive mountains that are controlled pretty much by China. So what India is doing now is that it is repurposing its surface-to-surface intercontinental ballistic missile, the Agni 5, into a bunker buster missile. The Agni 5 has a top speed of Mach 15 to 20 during its terminal phase. Striking targets at that hypersonic momentum compounded with 7.5 tons of explosives will lead to much deeper penetration. Welcome everybody to another episode of Basement Batak. Before we get to today's topic, I just wanted to thank everybody for subscribing to this channel, because we've recently crossed about 1,000 subscribers. So it's a little bit of a milestone for myself and for Basement Batak. So thank you very much for listening. I hope I can keep turning out good content for you guys, and I hope the community grows. So let's dive into today's topic, which is redefining strategic depth. Now, if you watched the last episode, in that I talked about how technological advances has changed the way modern militaries are conducting their kinetic operations. So the conventional way of fighting wars has vastly changed because of these technological advancements. In a similar vein, technological advancements really has changed the idea of strategic depth, or the way we look at depth in terms of geography. So in today's episode, what we're trying to do is challenge the conventional notion of how geographies are seen. So when we talk about strategic depth, it's normally seen in a horizontal manner. So how deep your territory is horizontally. What I want to do is try to kind of take a 3D look at what geographies look like exactly, and how there's a vertical layer that needs to be looked into. And the recent wars, such as the one against Iran and even Hamas to an extent, has shown you that the conventional way of fighting wars over land, air, and the domains that we know, the three main domains, air, land, and sea, is not the case anymore. Now there is an underground domain as well that no one is really talking about. So we need to look at that. And that's the idea of today's episode. And as we discuss this and I show you the lay of the land for India and Pakistan specifically in this episode, I want you to see also how there is a little bit of a realization in both sides that there is a vertical component to strategic depth that needs to be addressed, which is why India is looking to repurpose its Agni 5 into a bunker buster of sorts. Before we dive into today's topic, I just want to revisit an idea that was developed by Edward de Bono back in 1967 called lateral thinking, or in layman terms, thinking outside the box. What de Bono proposed was an unconventional and indirect, and let's say creative way of approaching problem solving. Famously, his idea was adopted by the oil drilling industry. What used to happen in the conventional sense was oil used to be drilled all the way vertically down from the surface of the earth and all the way down into oil depots under the surface of the earth. And if you didn't find anything, you would take your probe out, go to another location, drill all the way down again, and hope you hit oil this time. So what he proposed was that corporations need to think a little differently to find solutions to problems. What the oil industry was facing was that this was a very expensive way to do things back then. So what he proposed was that instead of going all the way down and then coming back up and then going to another location and then drilling down again, how about we drill horizontally? So you go down all the way. If you don't find oil, then start drilling horizontally underneath, because you've already gone all the way down and most of the cost of drilling was to drill from the top to the bottom. So try drilling horizontally until you start hitting oil depots. And that kind of changed the way the oil drilling industry was working. And that became a success story for de Bono's lateral thinking. So what I propose is that we use the idea of lateral thinking, which was basically in the oil industry, meaning going from vertical drilling to horizontal drilling, and apply that to strategic depth, which is seen as a horizontal geographic advantage. What I want to do is flip that and use lateral thinking to now show you how there is a vertical component and how geography's vertical depth is also strategic depth. Strategic depth conventionally is seen as horizontal depth in your geography. So if you were to compare India and Pakistan's geography horizontally, you would notice that India has a horizontal advantage over Pakistan's geography. If you were to measure from east to west on both of these geographies, you would notice that Pakistan, give or take, has about 700 kilometers in horizontal depth, whereas India has over 2,000 kilometers of horizontal depth. In this image, although it's 2D, what you will see is the topography of both India and Pakistan. So if you look at the color coding given on the side, you will be able to see the vertical depth in these countries. You will notice that India mostly is a flat terrain that is marked in green. Many parts of eastern Pakistan are also colored green. What the green color coding signifies is that this terrain is mostly flat in nature, so it's anywhere between 0 to 500 meters above sea level. What I want you to notice is that western Pakistan is mostly colored in brown. And if you look at northern Pakistan and some parts of northern India, you will see that this is very high in terms of vertical depth. This is basically the Himalayan belt, which is home to some of the highest peaks in the world. Just as a side fact, these mountains grow 2 millimeters taller every year. So what this map is showing you is basically that India has the horizontal depth advantage, whereas Pakistan clearly has the vertical depth advantage. Let's take a closer look at India and Pakistan's topography on a 3D map. To the north of India, you will notice that the Himalayan belt almost forms like a natural border between India and China. You will also note that starting from southern China all the way into northern Pakistan, western Pakistan, and into Afghanistan, stretching all the way into Iran, that entire terrain is pretty mountainous and very rugged in nature. As we focus into this map, you will notice that the terrain is pretty flat all the way from Sindh, stretching into northern India, all the way through to Bangladesh. Now, take a look at this map that gives you an idea of where the 7 headquarters of the Indian Army commands are. 4 of these are very relevant to the India Pakistan conflict, namely the Northern Command in Udhampur, the Western Command in Chandimandir, the Southwestern Command in Jaipur, and the Central Command in Lucknow. If you were to search these 4 command centers on Google Earth, you would notice that all of them are on flat terrain, with Udhampur being the most further north, very close to the Himalayan belt. So looking back at the 3D map, you will notice that all these 4 bases come within that little corridor of flat terrain. This matters because Pakistan's western geography gives it layers of rugged terrain under which it can shelter its strategic assets. Very similar to how you saw Iran's enrichment facility in Fort Dau. Iran specifically built that enrichment facility under the Zagros Mountains for this very reason. The rugged terrain of Fordo and the thick mountains of Zagros gave the enrichment facility a natural shield against US bombings. So while Israeli and US jets were flying all over the Iranian airspace, they really couldn't do much damage to Iran's strategic assets. Similarly, Pakistan can place its strategic assets and shelter them under the mountainous terrain of western and northern Pakistan. In the event that the Indian army advanced into eastern Pakistan, the Pakistani army could melt into the mountains of western Pakistan and establish their bases there and launch attacks from there. This is very different to Pakistan moving eastwards into India. Then they would have flat terrain to move all across northern India, and their northern flank would be protected by the fact that there are these massive mountains that are controlled pretty much by China. It is because of this unique topography that historically all the invasions that came into the Indian subcontinent started from Sindh and then moved upwards north into northern India all across to Bangladesh. You can see that there is a natural and flat corridor in this region that is surrounded by tall mountains to the west of Pakistan and the north of India and the hilly areas of southern India. One of the lessons learned by India from the last round was that their Air Force was not really a match for the Pakistan Air Force. So what India is doing now is that it is repurposing its surface-to-surface intercontinental ballistic missile, the Agni 5, into a bunker buster missile. The advantage to India of using surface-to-surface missiles are many. One, they won't need to risk their aerial platforms to deliver these bombs. So India could fire these missiles from deep inside Indian territory. Two, aerial bombers can only carry so much weight. The American GBU-57 weighs about 35,000 pounds and carries about 2.5 tons of explosives. The repurposed Agni 5 will carry 7.5 tons of explosives. Third, the Agni 5 has a top speed of Mach 15 to 20 during its terminal phase. In comparison, the American GBU-57 has a terminal speed of less than Mach 1. Striking targets at that hypersonic momentum compounded with 7.5 tons of explosives will lead to much deeper penetration. This repurposing of the Agni 5 gives us an indication that India has a realization of Pakistan's vertical depth and is trying to counter that advantage. So that's what vertical strategic depth is all about that I'm proposing needs to be looked at. I think a lot of these countries realize this component, and I think what the recent war against Iran showed was that using your conventional means by, let's say, airdropping bunker buster bombs on mountains is not optimal for many reasons, as we saw in this video. Again, this shift in thinking has happened because of technology. So, as far as we know, there's no weapon out there that can actually flatten a mountain. And obviously, this is not the only way to look at vertical strategic depth. So, there are people who propose building critical infrastructure underneath the seabed, because what the sea really does is provides you like an additional layer of protection against projectiles. But all that may be for another time. What I do want to do in the next episode is talk about another way to look at vertical strategic depth, and that's into the domain of space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about low Earth orbit satellites and why that matters in the new modern warfare. So be sure to catch that. And if you haven't already, then please do subscribe to the channel. Hit like and share. If you like this content, please do share it with your family and friends. And I hope to see you in the next episode. Take care.